Hi, everyone. We should have a short and sweet video this week. I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of shitty first drafts and the revision process. So let's go. On your Blackboard, you may have noticed that I added another file titled Peer Review Essay 1 Directions. Now, you don't necessarily have to read that right now. We'll have time to look at it in class next week. But what I wanted to point out to you tonight was this essay that I have linked from the assignment sheet that's called Shitty First Drafts by Anne Lamott. Many of you may have heard of this essay because it's quite famous in the writing world. And I share it with you a few places throughout the course, including in the peer review instructions and the idea generation instructions, because I think it shares some really important aspects of the real writing process as it happens in the real world. So if you click that link, it will open the essay. Now, Anne Lamott is a very successful writer. I strongly recommend her work if you're not familiar with her. One of my favorite books that she has written is titled Operating Instructions, and that's a memoir about her son's first year of life, and it's really fabulous. But the essay I wanted to introduce you folks to today, as you can see in front of you, is called Shitty First Drafts, from her longer book about writing, which is also really wonderful, called Bird by Bird. So I would ask you to go ahead and read this essay really carefully. It's only about a page and a half long. But what she talks about is the fact that, as she says right here, very few writers really know what they are doing until they have done it. So if you start out your drafts feeling unsure, feeling like you don't know exactly where you're going or what you want to write about, that is okay. And as Anne Lamott says, for her and for most of the other writers she knows, writing is not rapturous. In fact, the only way she can get anything written at all is to write really, really shitty first drafts. So that's what I would like to encourage everyone to do this semester, is when you first start writing, as Anne Lamott says right here, start writing without reining yourself in. That first draft's intention is just simply to get some ideas down onto the paper. So at this point in the writing process, I would encourage you not to censor yourself or judge yourself too harshly. And I would also encourage you to fight against the same issue I have, which is getting hung up on, maybe say a particular sentence or a particular paragraph that you can't quite craft exactly how you want it, and then prevents you from moving on and getting that draft finished, okay? So as Ms. Lamott says, she would just get down a draft that she calls long and incoherent and hideous, because that gives her something to work from. Then the next day, she sits down with that draft, she takes out her red pen, and she goes through and digs into it and starts revising. She starts finding little gems that she can brush up. She starts editing out things that she doesn't need. So just keep in mind, as Ms. Lamott says, that almost all good writing starts with a terrible effort. Now, I don't mean to imply that your efforts are going to be terrible, but many of us feel that way, right? I was just working on something for the grad certificate program that I'm enrolled in, and I was thinking this afternoon that my first draft was pretty shitty. But then I went back and revised it a few hours later, and pretty soon it was looking better and better. So I think you'll experience the same thing. So as I mentioned in the peer review directions, and as Anne Lamott says in her essay here, we're going to think about our drafts this semester as down drafts, up drafts, and dental drafts. And once you read that whole essay, you'll see why she refers to them that way. What I want to really encourage you, though, to do for the peer review session that we're going to conduct either in class or on Zoom is to not bring your shitty first draft to the peer review session. The essay that you bring to the peer review session will be in a draft form. We're not expecting it to be perfect and completely finished, but we also don't necessarily need to review the very first effort that you get down on paper, because chances are you yourself are going to be able to revisit that draft and do some fixing up. So as Ms. Lamont says here, the down draft, also known as the shitty first draft, that's just about getting ideas down. We're not censoring, we're not worrying about grammar, we're not worrying about spelling. We are just going to go ahead and get our ideas out. The next draft, the second draft, is what I might refer to as the updraft. So that's where you fix it up. So you start considering the structure, you start considering the flow of ideas. You continue to keep track of sources if that's something that you're using. Okay, now the dental draft is the one that you're going to bring to the peer review. So this is kind of the seriously revised draft. Again, it's not the first version you threw on the paper. It's not that first run through revision that you did where you cleaned it up. This is the serious revision. Okay, so again, I'm just encouraging you that when you come to the peer review session on the date that your class has it, you bring a well revised draft instead of that down draft where you're just getting your ideas down. Okay, now some of you at this point might be thinking to yourself, okay, Nora, but like, I'm not really sure how to go about revising. I'm going to help you out here in the next section of our video. So this is just a really brief PowerPoint that I've put together a couple years ago. You can see it comes from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A lot of the content does. And it just offers you some steps to successful revision. So they're pretty simple, and students over the years have had great success with them, and I think you will as well. So just keep in mind, when you hear that word revision, it literally means to see your work again with fresh new eyes, okay? So I would argue that all good writers engage in this process. There may be some magical person out there in the world who is able to write a first draft that's completely satisfactory to them in every way. I'm not that person, maybe you are. But for most of us, we're going to need to revise to get our work to the highest level. So do keep in mind that revising is different than proofreading. People often think, okay, I'm going to revise my essay. I better go through and fix all my grammar and my spelling errors. That's not actually revision, that's proofreading, okay? It's also different than editing. Editing has to do with things like looking at the sound of your sentences, looking for variety, looking for repetitive sentence structures and things like that. When we're asking you to revise, we are asking you to reconsider your essay and probably to make deep level changes in it. So what does that look like? Here are 9 steps that you can follow for revision. And what I want you to notice about these steps is that they move from kind of big picture ideas to small nitty-gritty details. Now, students and sort of novice writers often want to jump to step 9 in their revision process. Their teacher or their professor says, okay, you need to revise your essay. So they jump immediately to step 9 and start looking at the sentence level. I want to challenge you this semester to leave that sentence level revision for last, because as I've mentioned in the past, you can have the most beautifully crafted sentences in the world, but if you don't have a clear main idea, or if the organization of your essay is confusing, it doesn't really matter, right? So we refer to these as global concerns and then local concerns of the essay. The global concerns of your writing would be probably about the first, let's say 4 or 5 steps in the revision process. The big concerns have to do with things like, did you meet the requirements of the original assignment, right? If you didn't do that right off the bat, it doesn't matter how good your comma use is, right? Have you really closely examined your thesis and your topic sentences? Have you created an organizational pattern that's easy for your reader to follow? These are the bigger concerns. Once you have those sorted out, then you can move down to those sort of lower level concerns, things like tone, sentence structure, word choice, things like that. So let me go through these 9 steps and offer you some kind of probing questions and tips and tricks for using them in your own revision process. So the first one and the most important one is to reread that original assignment sheet. Please don't assume that you could remember exactly what the prompt asked for, especially the word count, okay? And what you should do is assess your draft to see how well it's meeting each aspect of that prompt. And what I actually do in my own homework is I will print out the prompt and literally draw a line through each requirement when I know that I have met that requirement. So if that's useful for you, that may be something you would try. And then you can jot down in your notebook or, wherever you keep your notes, anything that you still need to do to meet the requirements. So once you've met the original requirements, I would suggest looking at your thesis statement and your topic sentences. These are really the skeleton of your essay, right? The building blocks, the bones of your essay. So ask yourself, do your thesis statement and your topic sentences capture all the key points of your essay? If not, there's probably some revision that needs to happen. Do your topic sentences support your thesis statement, right? Did the thesis statement in turn preview that main idea or that topic sentence? They work in tandem, right? So you may need to take a few minutes and review your draft and see what you have to do there. Still looking at thesis statement and topic sentences. Does everything in the essay work to support your main ideas? And something else you'll consider is whether or not that thesis statement is debatable, or you might call that argumentative. Now, the personal statement essays are pretty much debatable by nature because you're arguing that you deserve a certain scholarship or that you had a certain outcome from an experience. So for this essay, you don't necessarily need to worry about that too much. But for future essays, certainly do keep in mind this idea of arguability or debatability. Okay, so you're satisfied that you've met the requirements, you've studied your thesis and topic sentences. Now we can look at the support, okay? You might think about that, in other words, as the details and explanations you give to support your main ideas or your evidence and analysis. So did you prove the topic sentences that you used? Have you, in other words, developed your ideas? Does all the evidence or details that you include in that paragraph directly support your topic sentence? If not, is there anything that needs to be edited? Later in the semester, we'll talk about citing sources. That would be something to check right here that you've done that correctly. Maybe your ideas have simply changed and you need to, revise to reflect those changed ideas. And then finally, did you fulfill the promise of the premise, right? Did you fulfill that thesis statement that you laid out to your reader? Once you've examined the support, then you can consider the arrangement, or another word for that would be the organization of your essay. So have you used a logical pattern that makes sense to your reader? And an easy way to check that is to have someone else read it, okay? Do you need to use more transitional words and phrases to kind of show the connective tissue between your ideas? That can be a really simple and effective revision. Okay, so next up is the balance of your paragraphs. This is a pretty easy one to just see visually. So just kind of look at your paragraphs as blocks of text on the page. Are they all approximately the same length, right? Do they hit that 1/3 to 2/3 of a page in length, sort of ideal that we talked about in class for paragraph lengths? Is there any part of the essay where you feel like you're giving a lot of time and weight to one element, but not adequate time and weight to another element? If so, you might want to balance those. The last things to consider with balance are your introduction and concluding paragraphs. It's very common, especially with the conclusion, that it is much shorter than the paragraphs that precede it. And that feels pretty deflating for the reader. It's very common that you read through a whole beautiful essay with beautifully developed paragraphs, and then this conclusion for some reason only has 2 sentences. And you can almost hear the person running out of steam in the essay. So do try to develop introductory and concluding paragraphs that are about on par lengthwise as the rest of your body paragraphs. Okay, so now we can really dig into the introduction and the conclusion. So in the introduction, look for a really exciting opening line for your reader, right? You may have heard this referred to as an attention getter or a hook. What I would urge you to do is stay away from what we writing teachers refer to as zonkers. These are these big bland statements that don't really have meaning that novice writers use all the time. Since the dawn of time, XYZ has happened. In recent times, ABC has become a worse problem. In this essay, I am going to, et cetera, et cetera. So, try to find an engaging opening line for your reader that doesn't fall back on one of those cliches that we hear so often. You might consider brainstorming a few attention getters and then choosing which one you think feels the most powerful or the most interesting. After you've looked at your intro, you're ready to look at your conclusion. So it's a nice idea in your conclusion to echo the attention getter or the opening gambit that you used in some way. It just really makes your essay feel like everything kind of hangs together and comes full circle. So that's not necessarily a requirement of writing in this class, but it's something I would urge you to do just because stylistically your reader is going to find it very pleasing. Another important element of the concluding paragraph is rewording and restating main ideas and thesis statements. So you don't want to copy and paste those sentences and just repeat them word for word, but you do want to remind your reader of the important key points that they have read, because that way those key points will linger in their mind very strongly. The concluding paragraph is usually not a great place to include new information, so I would urge you against doing that. And then finally, again, just make sure that it doesn't feel like it fizzles out at the end. We want to keep that paragraph right on par with the rest of them. Now we're getting into some of these local concerns. The first one is tone. So the tone of your writing, is it appropriate for the assignment? Now, most times when the tone is inappropriate, it's not necessarily intentional on the writer's behalf. But what you want to think about, again, is the scope of it, right? The audience, the occasion, the subject, and the platform that you're writing on, okay? So be very careful to avoid sexist language, racist language, or other inappropriate language. Think about not alienating your reader with a belligerent or angry tone. Try not to accidentally insult your reader or make assumptions about them that might not be true. And finally, especially in personal narratives or in personal statement essays, we want to walk that fine line of sharing enough details to develop our ideas, but making sure that we're not oversharing in a way that's not appropriate for the occasion. We finally arrived at the sentence level. Now, this scholar, Peter Elbow, first of all, I just love his name. And he gives us a lot of really excellent advice for sort of hearing the music of our sentences. So he reminds us that if you are stumbling or getting lost in your own sentence, you can assume that your reader is going to as well. So I would encourage you to read your essay out loud, because that's a really great way to spot sort of awkwardnesses, as he says, that need fixing. And keep in mind that if you're bored or lost in your own writing, you can probably assure that your reader is going to be as well. As Peter Elbow says at the end here, a sentence should be alive. So when you're ready to get down to this very nitty-gritty level of revision, that's when we want to really try to craft these sentences to push your writing to a more sophisticated level. So some ways to do that the Writing Center at UNC offers is to use forceful verbs, right? Instead of saying, I got the prize or I got the promotion, you could say I attained the prize, I earned the promotion, right? Those sound more forceful and more active. You might also look for repetition. So places like, let's say you're starting lots of sentences in your paragraph with the word I in the personal statement essay. I would definitely encourage you to go through and revise those sentences so they don't all start the same way. Right? If you've used the same word or phrase twice or more in consecutive sentences, that might be another place to keep an eye out for repetition. If you end a sentence with a word or phrase and then begin the next with an identical word or phrase, that feels repetitive. So keep your eye out for that. You might also, again, as I mentioned before, check for sentence variety. You have some short sentences, some long sentences. You might think of them as simple, compound, and compound complex sentences. That helps keep your reader engaged and active. And do aim for precision in word choice. Bust out that dictionary, bust out that thesaurus. Don't settle for good when you can say something is magnificent, right? It doesn't mean that you always have to use the biggest or the fanciest words we can find, but what we're looking for is the most precise word that we can find, the most vivid word that we can find, okay? Now, another tip that I think is really helpful, and it might sound sort of strange, but it works really well, is to read your essay backwards, sentence by sentence. So start at the end and take it one sentence at a time, reading backwards. What that does is, our brains are very good at filling in what we thought we wrote or what we wanted to write. And it shows it to us, and that's actually not what we wrote. What ended up on the page was not what we heard in our head. So when you read an essay backwards, it sort of takes you out of the flow of ideas, if that makes sense. And it makes it easier to spot any grammar errors or weird wording or any, thing that makes your sentence less than pleasing. So think about that tactic. a few more suggestions for you. I typically revise on a hard copy, and most of the literature and studies about revision shows that revising on a hard copy is better. It's easier to make notes and it's easier on your eyes. So, maybe perhaps for your updraft, when you're ready to fix up your draft, you might print it out and do some actual writing on it to help plan your revision. As I mentioned before, reading your essay out loud can be quite helpful in spotting awkwardness or other strange places that you want to fix up. Do realize that writing is a process. It does take adequate time for success. So again, I would suggest that you leave yourself time for each draft that you want to look at. Don't plan to do all of your revision in one day. It can be really great to put the thing away, step away from it for a couple hours or a couple days, and then come back to it with fresh eyes for that revision. We do also recommend that you revise for one item per session, especially if you have a lot of things to work on, because it can feel really overwhelming. So maybe in one session, you might look at your introduction and conclusion. And then in the next session, you might go through and look at grammar. But maybe you're not trying to do all those things at once, so it doesn't feel like sort of too much to handle at one time. And you might actually even make a revision plan and check off those items as you go. And if you would like to do that, you can simply navigate your way back to this slide that lists the steps and follow each of these steps in your revision plan and check them off as you go. So I hope this was helpful to get you prepared for the peer review and to urge you along in a really great revision process during Comp 1. If you have any questions, as usual, I'd be happy to answer them. And other than that, thanks for listening, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.